Hi, it's me, Ingrid INFP, and we're going to be talking about death. um, I went to a palliative course, a class about palliation for my medical degree. It was 3 days course, and 2 of the days was about like the medicine around it, about like how to treat people who have a disease that you cannot cure, basically, and how to help a person have the best quality of life in the last moments. That's pretty much a summary of it all. So we had 2 days. Mostly it was about pain management, but there's also other kinds of symptoms that you can get when you're dying, such as you can feel nausea, you can have difficulty with breathing, you can have other kinds of symptoms, basically. You can have anxiety, like this existential dread kind of anxiety, but like it's physiological. Then the third day was about conversation, and that was difficult. I actually had a panic attack during one of the scenarios that we were having, and that was the point. The point was for us to face our fears, pretty much, and it was good because we had like this supervising person next to us who was like basically whispering in our ear, and that we could pause the scenarios at whatever time we wanted. And so we had a really good supervisor who was actually a psychotherapist. Like, she was a psychologist in Gestalt therapy, which is basically acting therapy, where you're like acting out scenarios. I think that that would be pretty good for me, actually, as an autistic person. I think that maybe it would be a thing. Not to like know what to say in conversations, but to kind of explore feelings through conversation, because that's kind of what I do here. I kind of do monologues, but I would need to like have a person. I don't know. But so she was really good and really supportive, and it's important to be supportive in that case, especially because like I needed to feel safe in order to make mistakes in the conversations, because when I'm with the patient, I don't want to be making the mistakes there. So we kind of had this testing lab of like, okay, you can test out different things and see if it works or not. And we had an actual professional actor, act out the patient cases that we chose for them. And the actor was really, really good, and she would put herself in character and act out these different scenarios very well. So I wanted to work on dealing with emotions and how to react appropriately, which is very much an autistic problem now that I think about it. But it's basically that I wanted a patient who was quiet, and how to deal with that situation, understand what that person is thinking, how to ask for how the person is thinking, and also how to react in a way that is conducive to good conversation, so that was something I wanted to work on. I also wanted to work on having a patient who was irritated or very independent, and that was something different than what I would want, So I worked on that. We had a structure for the conversation, which was basically like first to set an agenda for the conversation, for these difficult conversations. To make sure that you're not just barging in and talking about what you want to talk about, but also what the other person wants to talk about. That was really good. And then there was how to give a difficult, when you have to say something difficult, like you have cancer, that kind of thing. How to give that kind of difficult news, basically. Um, and then the third part of it was how to decide about the plan for the future. Basically, in most cases, it's how to say that, okay, well, we can't treat this cancer, but we will try to make sure that you have the best time and the last bit time of your life. What is it that is important for you, and work through that. Now, I didn't really get much into that part of the conversation because, we had to keep starting from the beginning of doing the agenda and going through the whole process, the whole flow of a conversation. So we didn't get too much of that, but we did get to difficult, like how to, first you gauge how the person is feeling and what's going on. And then you give a warning, like an invitation and a warning of like, I am giving you this. And then you assess how the person is thinking and feeling about that. And then how to, be there for the person. And then how to go further with the conversation of like, okay, now let's make a plan. And for me, it's really hard to just be in there with the person. And you wouldn't think so, because like I'm really good with emotions as an INFP, like I can sit there with people. But for me, it's like, okay, so now I need to be able to actually use this information within my job, and I don't know the person, and so it's hard for me to connect, because I find that people are so unpredictable, and it's hard for me to know from their facial expression what they are actually feeling and thinking. Sometimes people cry and are like telling you what they're feeling like on the spot, and that I can like, okay, I understand, but sometimes it's much more complex. So I went into a panic attack, and it was actually something that I had talked about, was a fear of mine, because we had to talk about like what are your fears, what are the things that are most difficult for you. And I said, just as patients or family members sometimes are in shock and can't access to their higher faculties of reasoning, when I'm in that situation of like having to deal with somebody in pain or worried or whatever, it also uncouples my higher functions in my brain. And so I go into a panic. And that's what happened. Is that I went into a panic because the person was worried and asking me a bunch of questions, and I panicked. And they talked a lot about how there was this iceberg of like how doctors want to be at the top of the iceberg, and the murky feelings below the surface are what is important in these kinds of conversations, rather than the intellectualizing, fixing part of the brain, which is ironically kind of the autistic part of the brain, which is like intellectualizing, cerebral, let's answer the questions now. When really this patient was asking me questions, but it wasn't so that I would answer them immediately. It was more, okay, I need to sit with this person with their feelings and be there. And it was hard, because it's like, I can be silent for a while, but then I need to fill it with something. And you're not supposed to do that, but at a certain point. And so there was a certain technique, which was to say, I hear that this is difficult for you. Would you like to talk about it? Or are you ready to receive more information? Just like asking that question, like there. And sometimes they can say yes. They can say, yes, I'm ready. And then we can go further with the conversation. And then asking, like, have you thought about that this could happen? Have you ever thought about the fact that this could happen? And that actually was also a key phrase that could actually like open up much more. And so this is very important for me, especially due to the fact that I don't actually have people who have died close to me. Like I haven't actually been exposed to death much, apart from my job, right? So the only people who have died around me are my uncle and my grandmother. And I wasn't even really close to my grandmother, and I often found her mostly annoying. And to be fair, not to be fair, to be honest, I found her mostly to be a drain on my resources and annoying. But there were parts that I loved about her too, but it was just that like I wasn't very close to my grandmother. So I wasn't that upset when she died. And sometimes I'll be like a little bit like, oh, I'll think about her, but it's not like I thoroughly feel like I needed to grieve this person. My uncle, I didn't meet very often, I hadn't seen him in 8 years before he died. So, like, I don't think that I don't think that I can really grieve him much. Even though I did have a closer connection with him than with my grandmother, I know that sometimes I think like, oh, that's so sad that I'm not able to have this conversation about this with him. For example, one of those conversations is like the state of the world today. He was really interested in politics and stuff. I'm glad that he's not here to see how terrible the world has become within the past year, But I'm also, sad to know that, he would have been, when I went to Edinburgh, he died shortly thereafter, after I had done my visit to Edinburgh. I wanted to talk to him about all of the history of the place, and I never got that chance. Also, because he died like just several weeks after. It was quick, But I haven't even had a pet that has died. I've had the goldfish that have died, so sorry. But I didn't have like such an emotional connection to the goldfish. It's my ISFJ friend's dad died when he was 18, so I never got to meet his dad. His dog died, and I actually felt sad for that. It was actually difficult for me because he was one of the only dogs that I could actually stand to be around, because I am scared of dogs, and this dog was actually, I don't know, somehow the dog understood that I was scared of him and ended up being really calm. Like he knew to be calmer around me. And so it was really sad once the dog died. But still, it wasn't the same as like having my own dog die. So I haven't really been exposed to this. And in Western culture, it's not really like a thing that is close to us, death, So for me, it's very strange when I walk around the hospital and it's like, I know that this person is going to die tomorrow or like soon. And sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm talking to the person, and then like 2 days later, I find out, like I'm back at the hospital and I find out, oh, what happened to the person who was lying in this room? And they're like, oh, that person died. Or sometimes it's like, oh, the nurses are very good at knowing like, oh, this person has only a few hours left to live or something, because they're so close to the patients, so they know what's going on. And it's like, so I'm just there to say that the person's dead, and that is very strange. because like I've seen the person alive, I've seen the person dead. I haven't had a close connection to the person, and I'm supposed to just like do this very professionally, go and do it, and then like get back to my room, write up the papers, and be done with that person. And I've learned to do that. It's not like I have like a clump in my stomach or anything. But there are certain cases where it's like I have actually built a rapport with the person, and then like the person dies, and it's like, oh, but I move on. It's like I can't really. It's not like I'm grieving these people, and it's helpful to say, because I wish that like that we could have that empathy and then like keep building stronger through that. But it's not really the case, because there are so many patients, and I haven't had a conversation with some of these patients, that have died. But I've had such a patient during the week who was a woman who, she hadn't really had many problems, but she went to her healthcare center and they found out that she had low anemia. So then she was sent to the hospital, and at the hospital they found out that she had tumors and cancer everywhere pretty much, and that it wasn't possible to treat curatively, and so but that we needed to have a biopsy to know what kind of cancer it was, and if there was some kind of treatment maybe that could help. Like you can have palliative treatment. But the patient just was really sad because somebody had told her that we couldn't treat it, was what she had heard, and she found out that by saying the word untreatable, then she thought, okay, I'm going to die soon. And we didn't know when she was going to die. She could die in several months, she could die in weeks, she could die in days. Some people can live years, but I don't think that there was years for her due to the fact that it was so spread. And she was really sad and crying all the time, and it was difficult to have a conversation with her. And in the end she said that she wanted to go home, and so we said, okay, well, we can't force you to stay here. We would like to know what kind of cancer it is so that we can treat it. But she said she wanted to go home. So I was the last person to talk to her. She had talked to the hospital priest, right? Which she said was a good conversation. But she also had a conversation with me, which I hope was good, because it was the last conversation that she would ever have with a healthcare professional. But I'm spoiling what happened, but what happened is that she went home and she died a day later. From having no symptoms at all, she suddenly, and I don't know if we could have done anything different, but I think that it's good that she got to die at home with her cat and not have to deal with all this stuff that we doctors invent, It was what was good for her, in her case, for her situation. But I got to hear about her life, and she said that she blamed that she was a smoker, and she said that she had brought this upon herself. And I said, well, no, it's not your fault, and I think that we had a good conversation. But it is difficult when it's like, okay, so from one day to the next, the person that you've had a really deep conversation with is suddenly dead. That's happened a few times. Not many times, I will admit. Once it was an old lady that I actually had been home to her. I'd gone home to her, and then she was at the hospital, and I had talked to her, and she said that she wanted to see. She said that she wasn't going to see. It was winter time. She said she's not going to see the flowers bloom in the spring. And I was like, Yeah, unfortunately, I was a little bit too optimistic. You know, I thought that she might see the flowers bloom in spring, but she didn't. She ended up dying a few days later. Um, yeah, and so I was there. I'm like, okay. Um, there's another person who died who I had met at the emergency room, and then it was the first person where I actually had to talk to the family about the fact that he had died. I actually went there, and like he had this pain that morphine could not help. Like he got huge doses of morphine, and we found out that he had necrotizing fasciitis, which is like the worst the worst thing that you could ever get. Basically, it's basically like kills you within days, and it killed him. It's like an infection in the skin, but also in like every kind of organ fascia that you can have, and it gives huge amounts of pain. And so, well, he died the next day, and I was there to when he was dead, and I had to tell the family. And I never got any crash course into how to do it, you know? So now finally I got the conversation several years in, but I didn't know what to say. And there is no formula of how to say these things, but still, it did affect me. You know, it made me think like, okay, what happens if my parents start getting ill and dying, you know? And I don't know what that would do. Or my best friend. If my best friend died, what would I do? I've been watching Bufo Peregrinus and her channel where she lost her partner and best friend. I don't know how long they were married, but very, very long time. And her dad, all had, like, both had died in the same year. And it was like, how do you survive that, you know? And I felt totally unprepared of how like I don't know what's going to happen. And nobody knows what's going to happen, but I'm just like, I guess that if my parents start dying, somebody will maybe call me up in Sweden, and so maybe I can go down and see them. At the moment, they're healthy, I guess, but I don't really know. You know, it's not like we really talk that much openly about health in my family. My dad's side of the family, my dad hasn't mentioned my grandmother's name, like his mom's name, since she died 8 years ago. He always skirts around the subject, and he never says the word death when it comes to her. My mom, you know, her dad died when she was 20, and my grandma on her side died when, you know, many years ago, maybe like 15 years ago, something like that. So 15 years ago, or even more than that. But so I remember when my grandma died, but it was like such a abstract thing in my mind, you know. I don't think, yeah, I don't think that I'm like, I know what to do. Yeah, it's hard because I don't really know what my parents want. I think that my dad probably has written a will and has a lot of things planned because he's that kind of responsible person. My mom, I don't know. They are getting older. And yeah, the thing is that it's kind of crass to say, but I thought that I was going to die before anyone else. Because when I was a teenager, I thought that I was, you know, going to off myself. So I didn't think, you know, my brain wasn't developed yet, is my excuse, but it wasn't really an excuse, but like, you know, I didn't plan for the future and the fact that my parents might be fallible and actually human mortals. I think that, yeah, about my own death, I thought that maybe I would like just die quickly and without any kind of like stay at hospital or anything. Nowadays, I realize that, you know, because I'm going to be quite alone in the rest of my life, like I don't think that I'm going to have a huge support network. I think I might need to die in a hospital, and I think that I would need that care if I live a good long life, you know. Maybe I could die like in a retirement home or something rather than a hospital. It might be a little bit better. You know, the best case scenario would be that I am like really active and that I can like live at home until the very end and have people come home to me. But I don't know if I would trust myself to be all alone without any sort of help if I was like severely ill. Like I like my independence as like an introvert person, an autistic person, and I hate having people around to help me, but I see that I kind of need it. And I think that being a doctor and seeing all these people in all these constellations of things, I realized that, yeah, there are different ways of going about it. I think that, like, for example, my grandma on my dad's side, she had leukemia, like blood cancer, and she could get a really good treatment in Switzerland where she was. But in the end, I think that she realized that it was the end of her life and that she wanted to go somewhere sunny, so she went to the Canary Islands, and which is where they were living at the time. And they ended up dying there in the Canary Islands, next to my grandfather. And my grandfather, I have a lot of bad things to say about my grandfather, but when it comes to loving my grandma, I think that they were both very stubborn, they're both very stubborn and very independent people. And so the fact that they found each other and that they loved each other so much is very nice to see, you know. And he waxed poetic about the fact that like he would never find anybody else like my grandmother. And I think that they had both made peace with the fact that she was going to die once they left. But you know, I noticed that she didn't want to talk about it with me. I think especially because I was a doctor, she didn't want to talk to me. She talked to my brother a lot. And, you know, I guess that we never had the best of relationships, but I think that maybe, you know, she gets to decide, like with everything in her life, she gets to decide. And I think that was very true to her, that she got to choose who she got to talk to and who she didn't talk to, and that she got to decide that this is where she was going to die. I think that it was actually very nice. But you know, she was hiding a lot from us because apparently she did like a suicide attempt, which my grandfather couldn't really like say right out, and it was just brushed under the rug, you know. And I think it's important to say that people who are old and dying can want to go that way too, you know. And so it really made me think about a lot of things, but also the fact that autumn made me think about a lot of things. And the fact that the dying leaves are so bright before they die, they're already dead, but they're brightest before, or right before they fall off. And how nature can transform itself through all of this death. And all this death actually brings new life to the landscape. And the last moments of life can be just as wondrous as the entirety of life itself, and death in itself can be just as beautiful as life. There are, in the Middle Ages and all that, there was the cult of like the memento mori and all that stuff going on, and the fact that death was so close at all times, it makes you, like, I guess in the medieval times it was mostly about the awe of how many flaws we have, and how in awe of God we can be. There's that. Now, like, I don't really care that much about what happens after death. It doesn't comfort me much to know that somebody is in heaven or not. But that's just my beliefs. Everybody has different beliefs. There are different ways to go about it, and I respect all that. And I think that makes me a good doctor in that. But there's also the fact that, there's the awe in front of the awesomeness of God, nature, of life, and that we are powerless, and yet we can give this meaning. Death helps us give meaning to life, and I think that is very important to think about. It's important to believe something. It doesn't need to be in a God, it doesn't need to be in a religion, but to believe in the beauty of life, to believe in the love of the people around us, and care, and helping each other, and just being there for each other, and appreciating the life that we have, with all of its limitations. It also has a lot of possibilities, and at the end of life, and maybe it seems like there aren't many possibilities, like the possibilities have just like ground down to like zero, but it actually, that's the reason why my ISFJ friend became a geriatrics doctor, because of how badly his dad's death was handled by the healthcare system, and how he wanted to provide a much better end of life for other people. And I find that to be a very, very honorable, noble thing to do. I could not work with this day in and day out in palliative care, but it is part of my job, and it's part of life, and I think that I'm very inspired by this palliative course to live my life, and to consider how other people want to live their life and how they want to die. And it makes me also think about my personal life. What is it that I would want for my future, for my lack of one, for lack of a better term, my lack of future, my death, and also the people around me. And maybe I can have like actual honest conversations about this with people around me, Because if they're not willing to have this conversation with me, I might need to be the one to breach it. And you know, I don't need to breach it now, but I might need to in the future. And I think that I'm more prepared now to have this kind of discussion. So yeah, I think about the people who have died, especially on the 1st of November, which is All Saints Day. In Sweden, we go to the cemetery and we like put lights on the graves. Now, I'm not really. I might go to a cemetery, but I don't know any of the people in the graves, so I'm just going to be walking around and not, like, you know, I might just have a thought for certain people who have died, as a sort of kind of prayer, I guess. But yeah, I know that this is a very bleak subject, I guess. But if anybody wants to share, just share what you feel comfortable with. Their experiences with death, or their lack of experience with death. I don't know. If there's anything that you wish that the doctors would have done or said that they haven't, or maybe a very good doctor who has done or said the right things, I don't know. Just tell me in the comments. Okay, have a great day, everybody. Bye.